and bad news today. What would you like first? The good news is I am delighted to be here, and I'm glad you are here too. The bad news is I've been running late all day, and in my rush to get out of the house this morning, I didn't wear my wristwatch. Of course, how many times have you gone to church and you see the pastor take off his wristwatch and lay it up here on the pulpit? But you're going to loan me yours. Okay. Oh. Well, I want to begin by telling you about a story I read not too long ago. It was about a Scotsman who had been admitted into Oxford University, and he moved into the dormitory, and his clan was so excited that he made it to such an exclusive school. And his mother, however, was excited, but she was a little worried about how he'd do with those people that she called the snobbish Brits in a strange land. Didn't know how he would do. So she decided she was going to give him a month to get settled in, and then she was going to call him. And so she phoned, and she said, "Well, son, tell me, how do you find those English students?" And he said, "Oh, Mom, they are the strangest group. They are strange, and they're noisy people. On one side of me, in the room next to me, he bangs his head against the wall all night, and he won't stop. The one on the other side of me screams and curses until the sun comes up." And she said, "Oh, son, how do you put up with such rude and noisy people?" He says, "Well, Mom, I just ignore them. I just sit here quietly each night and play my bagpipes." In our text today, Jesus says, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And the lawyer knows the commandments. He knows that he must love God with all of his heart, soul, strength, and mind, and his neighbor as himself. And Jesus tells him, if you keep these commandments, you shall live. Which prompts an additional question from the lawyer. And he says, "And who is my neighbor?" And that's not an academic question. In the times of Jesus, the question of who should be treated in a loving, neighborly way was dynamite. Who is my neighbor? And I want to suggest to you, it's still a big question today. It's still a big question today. The Gentiles had entered into Palestine, and so the question was, well, should Greeks and Romans and Syrians, should they be treated like neighbors? Some of the Pharisees actually excluded from the circle of neighbors other Jews who lived in more rural areas and couldn't keep the ceremonial law as vigorously as those who lived in the urban areas. Others considered if someone was an enemy, they were unworthy of neighborly treatment. And so the lawyer is implying here, I have no problem with loving God and loving myself, but this business of figuring out who my neighbor is difficult. How far do I carry this neighbor stuff? Do I even include Scotsmen who play their bagpipes all night long? Well, true to form, Jesus doesn't give the lawyer a straight answer. Instead, he tells him a story. And we know the story as the parable of the Good Samaritan. And Jesus knows that effective learning doesn't occur through telling someone else what to believe. Effective learning occurs through allowing the other person to discover truth for themselves. And a word of caution, our familiarity with the story of the Good Samaritan may mask its shocking first century effect. Let's not forget that when Jesus reveals the story, he reveals who the hero is in the story, a Samaritan. The lawyer is so taken back that he cannot even voice the word Samaritan. To him, Samaritan is a vulgarity. And to speak of someone as a good Samaritan was an oxymoron. To grasp this story, we have to transport ourselves back to this culture. And Jesus begins his parable by saying a man was going down to Jerusalem from Jericho, and no further identification is given. Jesus wants the man in this story to be every person, every person. Whoever stops to help him won't be stopping because of this man's status. If they stop and help him, it will simply because he's a human being. If they stop and help him, it's simply recognizing his humanity. Now, there's a time-honored outline of this parable, the Good Samaritan. And this outline identifies three philosophies of life about this man who's lying bleeding beside the road and how he's treated. The first philosophy is exemplified by the robber. The robber's philosophy is this: what is yours is mine. He robs the man, he beats him, he leaves him for dead. Now, none of us would be guilty of such an overt act of violence. But that doesn't mean that at times we don't live out of a what is yours is mine philosophy. We may not fight, we may not steal, but through insensitivity and insensitive actions, our insensitive words, haven't there been times when we have robbed others of their dignity and their self-worth? All forms of abuse, sexual abuse, spousal abuse, abuse of the employee relationship, all are forms of the what is yours is mine philosophy. And whenever we abuse another human being in any way, aren't we as guilty as the robber on the road to Jericho? Aren't we treating them with a what is yours is mine philosophy? And this philosophy has many guises. When we plunder the earth's resources for our own generation's gain at the expense of generations yet to come, are we not the robber in this parable? The second philosophy is what is mine is mine. And it's characterized by the priest and the Levite. They were religious leaders, and when they saw this man lying on the road, apparently dead, they passed by, probably for at least two reasons that we can come up with. The first is they're religious men. And if they were to get within 6 feet of a corpse, they would be ceremonially unclean and would have to return to Jerusalem for a ritual cleansing. And they don't want to spend any more time on this road than is absolutely necessary. So, of course, they avoided the injured man and they moved on down the road. There's a second possibility. Besides, they're not stopping because of their religiosity. The second possibility might be because, are you ready? Maybe they were hypocrites. It's one thing to be considered a good and holy man in Jerusalem, where people can see you and admire your piety, when no one is observing you except a few sheep and maybe a goat. Why bother being good? No one's going to see you on this road between Jerusalem and Jericho. The priest and the Levite walk by. What's mine is mine. They have no time for some half-dead, lying man on the side of the road. A few years back, a story came out of Chicago that just breaks your heart. It was about a 15-year-old boy who bled to death just 35 feet outside the emergency room of a Chicago hospital. It seems that this teenager was an innocent bystander, and he was hit by a bullet when gang members started shooting at each other. And after he was shot, his friends managed to get him just outside the hospital, and they left him there. And apparently this bleeding youth was left there unattended for at least 25 minutes because it was against hospital policy for doctors and nurses to go outside the building to treat anyone. Instead, they had to wait for an ambulance to bring him inside the hospital. By the time they got him in, the boy was dead. It would seem they were more interested in not getting in trouble for violating hospital policy than they were in saving a young man's life. What is yours is mine is the first philosophy. That's the philosophy of the robber. What is mine is the second philosophy, and that is revealed by the priest and the Levite. But there's a third philosophy that's exemplified by the Samaritan. But before we get there, there's something we need to note about this philosophy. Please note, Jesus is telling this story in the form of threes. It's a teaching story. And his listeners knew that if the first two examples are negative, they could expect the third example to be positive. So the priest, the Levite, and the robber are negative examples. And now the audience, the people are now waiting to hear the rest of the story to find out who the hero is. And they are fully expecting it to be somebody like them, an Israelite. But Jesus blows them away. The hero of the story is a Samaritan. A Samaritan. The Samaritans are despised. They intermarried with foreigners. They mixed with heathen. They lived apart from the Jews, and they kept their own religion in a different way, worshiping not in the temple, but in their own temple. And Jesus makes a Samaritan the hero. In that day and age, that could get a person killed. Now, the philosophy of the Good Samaritan is, what is mine is yours. The Samaritan does the right thing. He cleanses the man's wounds with wine. He binds them with cloth. He takes him to the inn, and he pays for the man's continuing recuperation. And as this story now unfolds, we began to see the story from the perspective of the man in the ditch. And the man in the ditch didn't care if the man who cared for him was a Samaritan, or a Galilean, or a Judean, or a Pentecostal, or a Roman Catholic, or a Lutheran, or a Methodist. I like to throw that in because I served most of my career as a United Methodist. He only knew that the one who provided care and concern was a neighbor to him. And Jesus got his point across. Jesus asked the lawyer, now, tell me, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robber? And though the lawyer could not say the despised word Samaritan, he understood Jesus' point. And he answered, the one who showed mercy. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. Now, I chose this text today because I think it still has a very important message for us in the world in which we find ourselves living today. You turn on the news, you hear about another human being called illegal. A human being, illegal. You hear all kinds of stories, and they say, we've never had an incident like this. We've never had a time like this. This is unprecedented. You hearing those kinds of words? Look at what is going on. Our country is more divided than perhaps at any other time than right before the Civil War. There's a loss of civility. No one's listening. Everyone's talking. And no one is asking, who is my neighbor? That's the question for the church today. That's the question for you and I. In this day and age, who is my neighbor? Now think about all the characters in this story. And think about who do you relate to the most. I would suggest to you that you and I are not the robber. I further would suggest to you that neither are we the priest or the Levite. And surprise, we're not the Good Samaritan either. You and I are the man lying in the ditch. And we need to be reminded it was Christ who came and rescued us and picked us up and cared for our wounds and our ongoing recovery. And now, because of that, we are charged with passing that act of grace and kindness on to others. When we get that, when we understand that, then we will be ready to become the Good Samaritan. When we understand that, we will be ready to adopt the what is mine is yours philosophy. This story reminds us that there is no limit to who is our neighbor. The family of God, the human family, within that family there are no fences, only friendly backyards where folks talk to each other and have barbecues on Sunday night. This is the way we're supposed to live. To be compassionate persons who judge people not by their worldly status, simply by their human dignity. That's the good work that we are called to do. That's what, as Christians, we are called to do. Three philosophies of life. What's yours is mine. What's mine is mine. And what's mine is yours. And all three of them are still around today. But only one bears the character of Jesus Christ. And Jesus asks you and I today, which of these three was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of a robber? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.